Assalamu alaikum. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli waj'al li waziran min ahli Haruna akhi ushdud bihi azri washriku fi amri kay nusabbihaka katsira wa naskuraka katsira innaka kunta bina basira. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم وصلى اللهم على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين. All yours, Suhail.
Okay, assalamu alaikum. We are continuing from the 20th flash. Last week we read the third cause, which is page 204 on eRecitality.com. And so just a brief summary of the third. And so this whole topic about the 20th flash is on sincerity and like the disunity amongst the people of guidance and the apparent unity amongst the people of guidance. So the third cause of insincerity, he's saying, or the sort of disagreement and disunity amongst the people of truth, um, uh, is the rivalry for heavenly reward. And uh, so like then the people might say, let me gain this reward, let me guide these people, let them listen to me. So by thinking that way, this egoistic way, um, uh, the desire for the eternal satisfaction, heavenly reward. Do you set up rivalry with others? Um, and then you might think like, why are people listening to someone else? Why are my students going to someone else? Why aren't they listening to me? And in that way, you lose sincerity, and it opens the door, it says, to hypocrisy. And the cure for this, which is a sickness, as he said, of the spirit, is God's pleasure is won by sincerity alone and not by large following or great success, which is sort of the age in which we live in. People are concerned about size of following as equal to great success rather than sincerity and therefore God's pleasure. Because, as he says rightfully, that your following, or those who listen to you is by God's will, his determination, qadar, and not yours. The only thing we can do is control our choice, our position, in that we spread or spread the message, um, with the desire that people follow it, of course. But even as he says, if one person is guided by your words, that might be better than 1,000 people to God. So, um, to really focus on our own domain and not his. And he gives an example like prophets. Some prophets had maybe a few, some had none. But no one can say that they weren't a prophet because they controlled their choice, which is to spread the message, and it was all left up to God who would and would not listen. Um, so um, you know, we shouldn't meddle with God's concerns, as he says. And then he brings up an interesting point about that when we utter a word, we may be concerned about who's listening to us in terms of human beings, but the world is filled with spirits and sentient beings, like the angelic realm, the jinn, who would also take up your word and affirm it and confirm it. But usually our view is restricted. And if we say it with sincerity, then they too take up those words. And I guess what he means by sincerity is such that we are aware that whoever is present, however number are present, they may benefit from the word. So our like view, our audience becomes bigger. It becomes the entirety of creation. So if we have that view, then the spirit and sentient beings may also, if we're aware of that, may take pleasure from the words that we utter. But if our view is only, oh, only one or two people are listening to me, then that's what the intent of your word is for one person, for two people. That's it. It's not for the entirety of those around you, the spirits and the sentient beings that fill And really you can say, I guess those spirit sentient beings are, what's around you, the plants, the animals, the animate, inanimate objects around you. Um, the other planets, the stars, the galaxies, all those things. So that excuse me, that was the third cause. So unless anybody has any questions, we can reread the fourth cause or any comments. Okay. So fourth cause. In just the same way that rivalry and disagreement among the people of guidance do not arise from failure to foresee consequences or from short-sightedness, so too wholehearted agreement among the people of misguidance does not result from far-sightedness or loftiness of vision. So in just the same way that rivalry and disagreement among the people of guidance do not arise from failure to foresee consequences or from short-sightedness, so too wholehearted agreement among the people of misguidance does not result from far-sightedness or loftiness of vision. Rather, the people of guidance, through the influence of truth and reality, do not succumb to the blind emotions of the soul and follow instead the far-sighted inclinations of the heart and the intellect. Since, however, they fail to preserve their sense of direction and their sincerity, they are unable to maintain their high station and fall into dispute. As for the people of misguidance, under the influence of the soul and caprice, I think, I'm not 100% sure how to say that, and the dominance of sense perception, which is blind to all consequences and always prefers an ounce of immediate pleasure to a ton of future pleasure, they come together in eager concord for the sake of instant benefit and immediate pleasure. They come together in eager concord for the sake of instant benefit and immediate pleasure. Indeed, lowly and heartless worshippers of the ego are bound to congregate around worldly and immediate pleasures. Indeed, lowly and heartless worshippers of the ego are bound to congregate around worldly and immediate pleasures and benefits. It is true that the people of guidance have set their faces to the rewards of the hereafter and its perfections. It is true that the people of guidance have set their faces to the rewards of the hereafter and its perfections, in accordance with the lofty instructions of the heart and the intellect. But even though a proper sense of direction, a complete sincerity, and self-sacrificing union and concord are possible, because they have failed to rid themselves of egoism, and on account of deficiency and excess, they lose their union, that lofty source of power, and permit their sincerity to be shattered. Their duty in regard to the hereafter is also harmed. God's pleasure is not had easily. Um, the cure and remedy for this serious disease is to be proud of the company of all those traveling the path of truth. The cure and remedy for this serious disease is to be proud of the company of all those traveling the path of truth, in accordance with the principle of love for God's sake. To follow them and defer leadership to them. To follow them and defer leadership to them. And to consider whoever is walking on God's path to be probably better than oneself, thereby breaking the ego and regaining sincerity. Salvation is also to be had from that disease by knowing that an ounce of deeds performed in sincerity is preferable to a ton performed without sincerity. Salvation is also to be had from that disease by knowing that an ounce of deeds performed in sincerity is preferable to a ton performed without sincerity, and by preferring the status of a follower to that of a leader, with all the danger and responsibility that it involves. Thus, sincerity is to be had, and one's duty of preparation for the hereafter may be correctly performed. So, the fourth cause, he is talking about, um, so he presents the idea that one may think that disagreement and disunity amongst people of guidance happens because, they're short-sighted. They don't think of consequences, whereas people of misguidance may be far-sighted. But he says that's the opposite. Um, uh, the people of truth and reality do not succumb to blind emotions, as he says, and instead are far-sighted. They follow the inclinations of the heart, the true inclinations of the heart and intellect. But because they failed to preserve sincerity and direction, they lose this station. And um, how do they fall from the station? The ego, essentially. Dominance of set, or sorry. Well, he says, then he compares it to the people of misguidance, and he says they're under the desire, like the ego, the soul, the caprice, so these desires. Dominance of sense perception, meaning they're only concerned with what they see immediately, like the very material world, the immediate pleasure of the material world. They don't think about the future. They're not far-sighted at all. They don't think about eternity, the hereafter, life after death. And so they come together eagerly because they want instant pleasures. They're all in agreement about instant pleasure. They all want it. And so they all need each other, as you mentioned, other causes. Um, they all congregate around this because that becomes their truth. That this sort of godlessness becomes their truth. Um, Whereas people of guidance are looking to the hereafter, um, but they fall from this station um, because of ego, as he says, and that's how they lose this unity, this lofty source of power, and so they lose sincerity in the cause. So, uh, and he says God's pleasure is not had easily. And I think sort of a sign of that, which he kind of alludes to in the next paragraph, is that um, this discord, there is, in some sense, like the fact that there is no unity is also a sign of displeasure. That somebody may say God is displeased with his with the believers because of that, but also human beings are displeased with that, maybe that there is no unity amongst the believers. There's a weakness there. Um, and the cure and remedy for this is to be happy for those following the path of truth, those who love others for following that path, and that instead of being a leader, maybe being a follower is better because you don't have the responsibility that is needed for leadership. And by doing this, having a preference for others over oneself, loving those who are on the path of truth, you sort of break the ego. And do you see that then also the only thing you're doing then is also trying to tread this path of truth and share that message with others. So that's what I took away from the fourth cause, but doesn't anybody have any other comments? No other comments?
Thank you, Brother Sohail. Jazakallah khair. Yeah, I don't think the issues affecting the people of guidance are numerous from what I'm understanding, but they really stem from a deep problem, which is the issue of sincerity. So somehow um, the people of guidance have either become susceptible to ego to a large degree, or anyway, they have really gotten affected by this issue of ego. Where it comes from is another question. I mean, it's maybe it's worth discussing, but anyway, and the reality is that, uh, like the author says, God's reward or God's pleasure is not attained easily. There's a high price for it, and it's not a price of giving anything like physically or being material, right? It requires sincerity. So I think the heart of the issue is, why is there such a deep issue that's crept into the guy people of guidance with ego, how that really needs to be kind of re looked at. 19 whatever this was written in, 2025, where we are, I'd say ego is probably a much bigger, more spread thing now. But at the same time, many people coming from the side of people of guidance have learned many things, have realized many things. So, but I guess my point is, it's interesting. There's not a lot of issues. It's just really one kind of singular issue is what I'm reading and understanding. Do you agree? Do you all agree?
Yeah, Austin and I were actually having this conversation before you joined. Is about openness and to truth or message. Is that I think a lot just stems from, as you said, ego, and that people want to be, as he says in this cause, the leader. Not preferring others over oneself, and sort of losing this unity because of that. And um, as you said, it's just the tools are more available today for the ego to utilize or to serve the ego than there were when he wrote this. I don't know when he wrote the Flashes, but let's say 100 roughly years ago, somewhere around there. Probably a little bit later than that, but I mean, in other words, like the last century. Well, some time ago. So, even more available today, the tools for the ego. I think Austin, you were going to say something.
No, I agree also. Like I was saying that these phrases, the God's pleasure is not had easily, struck my attention, and also the serious disease, basically, that he says in the cure part of the last paragraph. So apparently, yeah, the ego kind of, and I mean, basic loss of sincerity. I mean, instant pleasure also ties to that, right? So we want everything like right now, in the moment, even in our daily routine, whatever we're doing, we lose the track of the hereafter in a way, right? So having that sense of the hereafter in our, like the goes into the purpose. Why am I doing whatever I'm seeking or doing in that purpose? Even before the ego kicks in, I have to, for at least for the people of belief, have that mindset of the hereafter, in the things that we do. Right? Like so having that sense and purpose, let's say even for having your meal and with the purpose of, yeah, somebody's providing me, yes, there is definitely a purpose for that. So sincere actions and sincerity or interactions as well as we were discussing as well. I mean, to be closed in terms of learning anything new is basically there's the egos as well, and as well as that there's loss of sincerity because it's just to keep my status quo of my instant, whatever my position that is, rather than, yes, I can work in terms of seek knowledge to make my hereafter as well.
Yeah, I mean this you mentioned this comment, God's pleasure is not had easily. I don't know, what are people's thoughts on that?
I mean, it doesn't come cheaply, basically, right? If there's no sincerity, just like if you see, I don't know, a teacher and then, you know, students are just getting by playing the game of not really learning and just using AI and just submitting that, right? I mean, the teacher knows already that, okay, yeah, you used AI. I mean, you're not learning anything, so it doesn't really serve the purpose in this worldly life. So without sincerity, I think nothing in whatever is being done, without recognition, having that vertical connection with the Lord of the universe, I don't think it means anything. So that's why it's not that cheap. That's how I took it.
Yeah, you're right. It's not um it's it's not available if you don't, if the ego gets in the way. So, you know, you're not able to because I like I was gonna say like I think God's pleasure is something that we, or at least I would feel my internal state of contentment with the truth and following the truth. Um, like that there's a pleasure in that like uh a contentment in knowing the truth and following it. But ego sort of, I guess, makes me forget that contentment. It is more concerned with, as you said, immediate pleasures, outcomes. How many followers do I have? Who's listening to me, etc. So, it's even if the direction and aim is the hereafter, the ego makes me focus on the immediate realm. Like the follower is an immediate. It's almost like the people of misguidance. Like, how many followers do I have? That's instant pleasure in some way. Who's listening to me? That's already instant pleasure in a way. You know, um, why aren't they listening to me? That's desiring instant pleasure rather than looking to the resurrection, to the hereafter. So, um, yeah. Any other comments? Awesome, you had.
Yeah, another thing, like, so for example, in my daily interactions with some people, the actions that we do, basically, and if I hear that, okay, for God's pleasure, I'm doing this action. But all these actions without sincerity, I think there's a lack for myself if I do that same action and there's no sincerity just for the action itself, then I fall in the same problem, right? So there's something extra with that with the action that needs to come. Let's say if somebody says, okay, let me do two extra nafil prayers, right, for God's pleasure, and they would add to that, or even, open the door and say for God's pleasure, right? I mean, it's a good action, definitely, but there's still that aspect of making that connection, I think, in the sincere aspect that is must be there as well. Does that make sense?
Can you restate that one more time?
I said just the within the action itself, without being there's no sincerity aspect to it. So this act, I mean, there's something lacking in the action. Although I do hear that from many young people, for the sake of Allah, it's a very common phrase used by many people, right? Oh, I'm doing this for the sake of God, right? So, but I'm looking at for myself as well. If I do this in my actions, if I just do it for the action itself without that sincerity aspect, then it's a lost case or lost cause.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. Yeah. Um, any other comments?
So, as I'm reading this a little bit, I'm starting to think more about what's the point we're supposed to take from it. And when I go back on the section, I say, well, the there is this critique of the people of misguidance, but I don't know if that's necessarily directed to the people of misguidance. In other words, if you want to understand where the people of guidance are having problems, I think he's actually indicating it by referring to the people of misguidance. So, uh, if we ask, well, what is it, lack of sincerity? What does that include? Well, what does that really mean? I mean, at first, it's pretty self-explanatory. But I mean, I would ask the question: does it also include then what the points he's putting here as the people of misguidance are doing? Meaning short-sightedness. Maybe there isn't. Starting from the top of the text, for example, on the previous page, even, but the short-sightedness, um, concern for the blind emotions of the soul. I mean, it's almost like he's pointing this out to say the people of guidance actually are suffering from these problems too. while they have this connection with something long visioned and something good, they also suffer from the soul and the caprice. They're also getting affected by it. They should become aware of it. I guess that's what I'm saying. They so the points that are put to the people of misguidance, I'm wondering, is there maybe a connection between that and even the people of nowadays, the people of guidance, that he's trying to instruct people to be careful from.
Yeah, that's kind of I definitely agree with you. That's kind of what I was trying to allude to earlier in that in some way for people of misguidance, egoism and instant pleasure goes along with their aim because the ego looks for immediate pleasure. Where is immediate pleasure had in this world? So their aim, their direction, and the ego are aligned. Like with their blind emotion and their need for immediate pleasure, they're aligned. The goal is one and the same. That's why they all unite around the same goal. Um, they're all worshiping the same thing. Whereas the people of guidance, the ego, the blind emotion, is not aligned with their vision, which is the hereafter. This long vision, this is sort of that looks to God and the hereafter. And so human beings being one and the same, if you were like the people of misguidance and let the ego, control your um or ruin sincerity or let blind emotion take hold, then in some ways you said like you sort of become like the people of misguidance, looking for immediate pleasure, not necessarily immediate pleasure in the way they look for immediate pleasure, but your immediate pleasure is like, why aren't, as he says, people listening to me? Why aren't they following me? Why am I not the leader? Why am, this, that, and the other? So that's immediate pleasure. And so you sort of forget the hereafter, even though your concern is the hereafter, unlike the people of misguidance. That's why he says their duty is also harmed. Uh, you know, in some way, even though it almost saying in a way he's saying it's not lost because the vision is still infinitely better than the people of misguidance, but it is harmed. It's not lost, but it's harmed, and that's why there's disunity.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, good point. There is a way back.
yes,
There isn't a complete, like, they're not completely misguided, but
correct. Yeah,
they do suffer from these issues. And so, because if you look at it, like 8 out of 10 of the things that he pointed out were a problem are on the side of misguidance. But why would this author concern himself to pay attention to the issues of misguidance? I mean, yeah, maybe he'll list it, but I think what's more important is he's concerned not only with critiquing them to a certain extent, but laying out really important points that the people of guidance should be careful from and that have fall prey to as well. How many people of guidance, maybe, whatever quote unquote guidance, try to work for religion with the mindset of immediate results, trying to go after very quick results, not being really long term in their view and their thinking, or measure their progress with those kinds of things. Right? That's counter to the notion of actually doing this kind of work. So, of course, ego. How many of them take ego from it and want ego from it? It's counter to what this work is, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just saying that while the text may seem so simple, I think he's also trying to really allude to people of guidance. You have these problems, actually. You need to wake up to it. Or be careful, they're creeping in more and more, or they can creep in more and more.
yeah, that's definitely the case. It's a good point. Any other comments? We can go to the fifth cause. Okay. So the fifth cause. Dispute and disagreement among the people of guidance are not the result of weakness. So dispute and disagreement among the people of guidance are not the result of weakness, And the powerful union of the people of misguidance is not the result of strength. I love how he always, just as a side note, he always starts off every cause with this to like emphasize over and over again is um because I think people maybe we'll I can discuss for I guess in people's psyche maybe at that age in that time like he was writing because especially with what had happened maybe he wrote this after the fall of the Ottoman Empire and people were concerned about um uh, the strength of European powers and science and irreligion, like the lack of religion, the lack of any sort of guidance, and thought that their position was inferior because of guidance in and of itself. So there's weakness there, whereas there's strength in misguidance. So it's interesting. I emphasizes over and over again, and I think that still. I mean, maybe I don't know if it still prevails to this day, but it was definitely a thing when he wrote this. Um, so rather, the lack of union of the people of guidance comes from the power that results from the support provided by perfect belief. Rather, the lack of union of the people of guidance comes from the power that results from the support provided by perfect belief. And the union of the people of neglect and misguidance comes from the weakness and impotence they experience as a result of their lack of any inward support. Interesting. So I'll read that again. Rather, the lack of union of the people of guidance comes from the power that results from the support provided by perfect belief. And the union of the people of neglect and misguidance comes from the weakness and impotence they experience as a result of their lack of any inward support. The weak form powerful unions precisely because of their need for union. The weak form powerful unions because of their need for union. And there's a side note where it says, among the most powerful and effective organizations in the West is the American Organization for Women's Rights and Liberty. Um, Even though some are called the fair sex and or weak and delicate, similarly, the organization of the Armenians, despite their weakness in small numbers, when compared to other peoples, with its strong self-sacrificing behavior, provides another proof of our observation. So he's pointing out organizations back then that existed, that unions of individuals or classes of society, so women or Armenians, that were considered weak but stronger because they had a union. So, since the strong do not feel similar need, their unions are weak. Lions do not union like foxes and therefore live as individuals, whereas wild goats form a herd to protect themselves against wolves. The community and collective personality of the weak is strong, and the community and collective personality of the strong is weak. Hmm. The community and collective personality of the weak is strong, and the community and collective personality of the strong is weak. There is a subtle allusion to this in the Quran in the words, and women in the city said, let me pull that verse up here. Are you able to see the verse?
Yeah,
Yes.
we can.
Okay. So I guess this is from Surah Yusuf. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. وقال نسوة في المدينة امرأته. Um, so he's focusing, I guess, on the word qala. Um, and Niswa being the woman. So he says, and the woman in the city said, the verb said being in the masculine form. Yeah, it's actually true because qala is masculine, whereas Niswa is feminine. And another interesting thing is qala is a singular. It's, I guess, Arabic grammar, but qala being singular rather than plural. So I guess maybe he'll allude to this point too. Um, and women in the city said, the verb said being in the masculine form, although it should be feminine for two reasons. Woman is a feminine noun and also plural. So-called broken plurals in Arabic are always regarded as feminine. So it's an Arabic grammar point in that um, uh, um, so it should be feminine. The verb should be feminine. We call that. rather than قال. For woman is a feminine noun and also plural. So-called broken plurals in Arabic are always regarded as feminine. Um, but by contrast, see the words the desert Arab said, the verb said in this case being in the feminine, even though its subject designates a community of men. Okay, let's look at this one. قالت الأعراب. So the Bedouins said. That's interesting. Okay. Um, آمنا. So, um, very fine grammar points he's pointing out. So again, he says there's a subtle allusion to this in the Quran in the words, and the woman in the city said, the verb said being in the masculine form, although it should be feminine, for two reasons, is a feminine noun and also a plural. So-called broken plurals in Arabic are always regarded as feminine, but by contrast, see the words the desert Arab said, the verb said in this case being in the feminine, um, uh, even though its subject designates a community of men. So I think what he's saying is that broken plurals are regarded as feminine, and I think in the second verse he points out Arab is a broken plural, I think. Broken plural, or I don't know if anybody has a better explanation, but it doesn't. It's not like I guess the English equivalent would be um, well, there's not really an English equivalent, but in I guess in Arabic, uh, to make something plural, uh, well, actually, does anybody have a better explanation? I have to look this up again. But broken plural, I think, means like you change the form of the word to form the plural. Whereas, like in a feminine, you add like an alif ta at the end, I think, something like that.
Yeah. Okay, but I think we get the main point, right? Which is
Yeah. So I'll just, yeah, just, yeah, I guess we can go on. But, um, so the verb said in this case being in the feminine, even though its subject designates community of men, herein lies an indication that an association of weak, meek, and soft women gains strength, toughness, and force, and even acquires a certain kind of virility. The use of the masculine form of the verb is therefore most appropriate. Strong men, by contrast, and in particular Bedouin Arabs, trust in their own strength. Strong men, by contrast, and in particular Bedouin Arabs, trust in their own strength. Therefore, their associations are weak, or they assume a stance of softness and caution and take on a kind of femininity, for which the use of the feminine form of the verb is most suitable. Similarly, the people of truth submit to and place their reliance um, in the firm source of support that is belief in God. Hence, they do not present their needs to others or request aid and assistance from them. So the people of truth submit to and place their reliance in the firm source of support that is belief in God. Hence, they do not present their needs to others or request aid and assistance from them. If they do sometimes make the request, they will not adhere to the persons concerned at all cost. Um, so if let me read this again. Similarly, the people of truth submit to and place their reliance in the firm source of support that is belief in God. Hence, they do not present their needs to others or request an aid and assistance from them. If they do sometimes make the request, they will not adhere to the persons concerned at all cost. Um, but the worldly ignore in their worldly affairs the true source of support. They fall into weakness and impotence, and experiencing acute need of assistance, come together sacrificing themselves wholeheartedly. The people of truth do not recognize and seek the true strength that is to be found in union. Hence, they fall into dispute. The people of truth do not recognize and seek the true strength that is to be found in union. Hence, they fall into dispute as an evil and harmful consequence of this failure. By contrast, the people of misguidance and falsehood perceive the strength to be found in union. by virtue of their very weakness, and thus acquire union, and most important means for the attainment of all goals. So the people of misguidance and falsehood perceive the strength to be found in union by virtue of their very weakness, and thus acquire union, that most important means for that attainment of all goals. The cure and remedy for this disease of discord among the people of truth is to make one's rule of conduct the divine prohibition contained in this verse. Do not fall into dispute, lest you lose heart and your power depart. Let me just pull up this verse here. So, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وأطيعوا الله ورسوله. But then he quotes the verse ولا تنازعوا وف- وتفشلوا وتذهبوا رياحكم. Um, okay. واصبروا إن الله مع الصابرين. So he says, do not fall into dispute, lest you lose heart and your power depart. And the wise divine command for social life contained in this verse: work together for the sake of virtue and piety. So we'll pull that verse up. Okay, so I think he's quoting um, did I pull the right verse? 5:3. I have to, it's a long verse, so um, yeah, I'll have to look to see where he's referring to in this verse. But he says, work together for the sake of virtue and piety. One must further realize how harmful to Islam dispute is and how it helps the people of misguidance to triumph over the people of truth. One must further realize how harmful to Islam dispute is and how it helps the people of misguidance to triumph over the people of truth. Um, and then wholeheartedly and self-sacrificingly join the caravan of the people of truth with a sense of his own utter weakness and impotence. Um, Finally, one must forget his own person, abandon hypocrisy and pretension, and lay hold of sincerity. So that is the fifth cause. So, he briefly, I guess he's talking about just how the apparent weak are strong in union, and those who are strong individually are not in need of others. So he's comparing misguidance where there's a weakness and impotence in that because there's no truth there. And so you have no strength to rely on. Your strength is your own self, your own ego. And because the ego is so weak and impotent, then you are in need of others to fulfill your needs. And so there's a union amongst the people of misguidance. Um, Whereas it's like foxes who come together or goats who come together. Whereas guidance, truth, perfect belief, in other words, I guess knowing that your strength is from an absolute source, you are not really in need of anyone else in terms of uh, the support. That's your perception because it's the belief is so strong. And so you're like a lion who's not in need of anything else. Um, there's no impotence or weakness in belief, perfect belief, or reliance upon an absolute source. Um, and so he gives the Arabic examples in the Quran with regards to the woman in the city, which is in reference to a masculine form of the verb in reference to women, whereas for Arabs, the Bedouin Arabs, even though it's masculine, it's a plural, it's given a feminine verb, and saying that the community of women together collectively, even though they're feminine, have a strength together, whereas the Bedouin Arabs individually um, are weak. Uh, their associations are weak because they have their own strength individually. Um, and because the association is weak, like you sort of have there's a femininity in that. In other words, there's a weakness. There's a weakness in union. There's very little union. So, um, and he compares that to people in guidance and those in misguidance. Um, People of guidance, their source of strength is belief in God, the absolute one. So they don't present their needs to others, like the people of misguidance. They don't request aid and assistance from them. Um, and if they do make a request, they don't necessarily like adhere to the person, or they don't form a union with them. So, but those of misguidance, the ones who are worldly, meaning they're looking for immediate pleasure, their concern is worldly affairs. By definition, they're weak and impotent, so they come together, which forms strength, and they're willing to sacrifice themselves for this strength. Um, and he says that because belief is so strong, the people of truth don't recognize the strength and union that can be had. So they get into dispute, and there's like evil consequence because um, you can see from the people of misguidance that union is a means to attain their goals. The strength in union is the means to attain their goals. And the cure for this, as he says, remedy for this is, he quotes the two verses, do not fall into dispute lest you lose heart and your power depart. Work together for the sake of virtue and piety. Um, so, um, the Quran is pointing out that dispute is where, or disunion is where you will lose, this sort of strength that you can have from union and belief. And because the common goal, as the Quran says, is virtue and piety. So when that becomes your common goal, virtue and piety, it's sort of, it's not looking that, because the common goal is virtue and piety, that really, that does away with the ego or cuts down the ego. Um, so when you realize that's the common goal is virtue and piety, it preserves sincerity, and that's how you attain union. Um, so, and then he points out lastly, like how harmful this disunity is because of this disunity, there's a weak collective weakness and impotence amongst the people of belief, which allows for misguidance to triumph over the people of truth. So, and that's how we attain sincerity. So, do you guys have any comments?
I'm just trying to make it more practical in my life. So reliance on God rather than reliance on the temporary things in this world. How do we, is there somebody can give an example? How do we do that?
I'm sorry, brother. Can you say that again, brother Aso?
No, no. So the principle of, yeah, so the unions basically of the people that's made up of people is actually weak versus what he says in the examples that the author gives in terms of, although something may be weak, but there's strength in that. And the real strength, he says, comes from basically if you're not falling into dispute and working towards virtue and piety, right? So trusting more rather than the powerful union or some other, rather than trusting in that, but the true source of whoever sustains me. That's where I need to, he says, the true source of support. So the worldly affairs ignore the true source of support, but they rely on their unions and other assistance from other beings. But what the people of belief should be doing is actually going to their true source of support.
So like you were saying, like what is like a practical example of that?
Right, yeah. If anyone has any.
Um, so that's a good question. I don't know if I think myself. You mean like a practical example of where this disunion happens, or like how do we address this?
For something that I can relate to in my life as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm
Um,
not understanding the question exactly. Can we just reiterate the question?
Yeah, so how I can benefit from this particular section in like practical living.
Have you ever seen any groups of people who are weak in their own physical abilities, maybe, or even in other resources, but they're because they're unified, they're more effective and than other people who are disunited? I think we see a lot of examples of that. I'm referring more to the issues at the latter part of the section regarding, like the section about women, for example, وَقَالَ نِسْوَةٌ فِي الْمَدِينَةِ. The women are strong. They're referred to as men. If that's how I understood it correctly, if I understood correctly. So, like, I have a lot of kids and I have daughters and I have sons, and I do notice that my daughters are very unified. I don't know if there's something because they sense a weakness in their own selves that they unify more, maybe not in all matters, but because they do, they're much more effective than my sons are in terms of like getting things, going places, getting access to resources. Like they're more supported, but individually they're not as strong. But because they're together, they actually can they they're able to do things interestingly in other ways. And I think you'll find that in society, you will come across people sometimes that individually, when you speak to them, you don't find anything like um, quite interesting or quite impressive about them. But when you start looking at them in the context of where they're supported from or what groups they're part of and things like that, then you're like, oh, well, this person actually has a lot of support around them, and this person actually is is subsisting because of that in some ways. So, um, yeah, I mean, is that relate to what you're asking? I'm not sure.
Yeah, but the author is making the point that in the worldly affairs that one ignores the true source of support. So in terms of worldly affairs that we are involved in, all of us, we do see those people, right? They get their way in terms of because they're supported, let's say, by a good financial network or good people that a powerful one group maybe, politically connected maybe. Yeah, but that's just worldly stuff.
So, yeah. So, which part can you refer to the text just so I understand which part you're saying?
Yeah, so let's say to the in the middle after the verses he says, right, similarly the people of truth submit to and place their reliance in the firm source of support, that is belief in God. Hence they do not present their needs to others or request aid and assistance from them. So so if they do sometimes make the request, they will not adhere to the persons concerned at all cost. That part.
So your question is like, what does that mean, or what is the like practically what does that mean?
Yeah, practically, how can I live with this?
Well, I think what he's saying here is that like that's not necessarily a good thing. Um, so like um, I guess if somebody is um, I mean, he's saying like if somebody does have a need, a person of belief who has perfect belief and submission to God alone, because he has such strength. If he does have a need, um, I guess sort of needs of, mm, this world maybe. Um, uh, he asks from them maybe of something. Um, maybe if I need help doing something or going somewhere or uh, let's say financial assistance or something. I don't know, but um, he requests from them, but maybe just sees them as a means. In other words, this is a means employed by his divine source, rather than seeing the person or individual as a person to form a bond with, because um, I guess that person who also maybe uh, have a strength and support and belief in God, they they too find that they have their own individual strength, but they realize maybe in that instance that, even a person who's a people of guidance, they, as it pertains to this world, um, there is a need for unity. Um, there's sort of like a divine wisdom in that. And that even though I think all things are from him and that, we aren't necessarily in need of immediate pleasure. If there's something, even if it appears trivial or small in relation to the hereafter, you know, we are, still in need of, assistance from others in this world. And that's a form of union or bond. Because maybe our outlook is the same still, though. The hereafter, our outlook and our vision is still the same, and we see that we're both trying to attain the same goal in the end. Um, so I guess in some way it's maybe he's trying to say like um, this sort of individualism for somebody who's a believer or who is not necessarily a good thing for unity. That's kind of what I take. So being by oneself or being individual or not trying to um, interact or communicate with other people of belief, other community of believers, is maybe not a good thing. That's what I took away, my understanding, but others may have another understanding.
Yeah. It's almost like because of belief, you have strength. So because of that strength, you don't go and seek help from others. But there's a problem. If you don't have good union with your fellow man and brother, then and you fall into dispute, you will lose. Ultimately, you will be the loser, even though you may not individually come from a place of sensing that because you have belief. So you feel strong. You feel like you have enough to to keep you going, and fulfill you. You don't necessarily need others, but still, according to the verse, you should not fall into dispute or not fall into disunity, so that because otherwise, then your other power, or maybe even your belief side, will actually be affected by it, and your power and strength will depart from you. So that's what I understand. It's unity is actually important. Unity in what was described before, like this whole, like the women are all united, in America or whatever. Armenia. That's nothing to do with belief and stuff, but they're very effective. It's an indicator of how effective they are as doing that. They draw a lot of strength from it. Believers don't necessarily need to have things like that, but in the sense of their faith or in the sense of their work for religion, they need to have that. Even though they may have enough to sustain themselves individually because of their belief, they still have to be united. They should still never be falling into disunity with each other. And they should work together. And it's the Quran is encouraging us, you should be together, don't separate from each other, because otherwise whatever you have left there then will finally even go away. I don't know.
It's interesting that you quote the fact. I think like to us, the verse also work together for the sake of virtue and piety. I couldn't find the exact Arabic part of that verse, but um, uh, the uh, work together for the sake of virtue and piety. Um, it's sort of a divine command that unity, as you said, is not optional, but it's like imperative for the point of social life, for the collective virtue of society and piety. So maybe, as he says, like in other causes, like our outlooks may be different, our perspectives may be different, but we're all seeking virtue and piety. The same sort of and virtue and piety, which essentially looks to the hereafter. Not be concerned with immediate pleasure of the world. And so for that sake alone, we should be working together because individually there's like sort of a weakness in achieving that goal when you compare it to misguidance, who is achieving the goal of, immediate pleasure, egoism. I mean, it's such a powerful force. It was then, and it's even more so today, given the tools that are available today to spread misguidance. So, um, it's sort of an imperative. So even though there's like, an individual has strength from perfect belief in God, as he says, that doesn't negate the need for unity for collective virtue and piety, for the sake of collective virtue and piety. If the goal is to, like as he says in a prior cause, if your concern is not the hereafter, but the hereafter of all men, as he says, that's the difference between misguidance and guidance, is that my concern is the hereafter, but it's not just my hereafter, but the hereafter of all men or of all people. So if that's our concern, then there's a need for unity. At least that's what I took away from it.
Yeah, Alhamdulillah, that makes very good sense. Thank you.
And it's interesting part of the verse, it says, do not fall into dispute lest you lose heart and your power depart. In other words, like it's interesting that it says heart, in that go back to the verse, but um uh I guess, I mean this translated as courage. I don't know if
Can
you
you
know
go to
else.
the Islam Awakened website maybe?
Where do you want me to go? Islam Awakening
Yeah. Islam Awakened. That has a few
.com.
translations. Yeah, islamawakened.com. And no, Islam Awakened. It's Islam Awakened. Yeah, that one. Go Quran. That's a good source, like to see the different translations. Go to the Quran. The first, that's the top one. Yeah, and then which verse was this?
It was 846.
Um, how come yours comes this way? No, this should be. like, Can you go up?
Up.
Yeah, so go back. I mean, I don't see this kind of view. Usually I just click on the top Quran search, go back again and do the Quran search without the sublinks. Yeah, s- just no, yeah, don't, yeah, that maybe.
The Quran root index.
Yeah, just click on, is it that? They change it or something?
Is this the website,
Like, it is
islamawakened.com?
like, yeah, yeah, just click on the Quran. Doesn't that take you to this? I don't know what about the multi-language.
This is what it takes you to.
Yeah, it looks different from me. Let me see. Yeah, this is better.
Okay, all right. So Muhammad Asa says, do not be at variance with another, lest you lose
Your
heart and
heart
your
and
moral
moral.
strength desert you.
So he says heart.
Hmm.
The other guy says you fall to strength depart from you. Pictal.
Yeah, Pickthall says your strength, lest you falter, lest you lose heart. I guess lest you lose like um uh or you'd be discouraged and weakened. So I guess it's about the verb if tashalu wa tadhhabu urihukum. So um some translated as heart, courage, discouragement, having discouragement, lest you falter.
Right.
Um lest you be weak in heart. In other words, I guess like the importance is that this collective union that we have is um like this connection that we have based off, like emotional connection that we have to each one another
Right.
because our goal is one and the same as the other verse says, virtue and piety.
Right. So this is
So
virtue and piety. Correct. Yeah.
yeah. There's a strength in that, power in that, as it says.
So
So,
rather than disputing, try to combine and join. You make a union.
correct. Yeah.
That virtue and piety. Correct.
Yeah.
Inshallah.
So, I think we're a little bit over time, but do you have any other comments?
That's good. Alhamdulillah. It was beautiful.
Okay. We can pick up the sixth clause, inshallah, next
Mm.
week. So, with that, I think we'll probably, I guess you can make the closing dua, inshallah.
الرحمن الرحيم سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين بحرمة سورة الفاتحة. Thank you everyone. Stopping the recording.